The night my wife told our children I was nobody, I was standing right outside the kitchen door. I heard every word. My daughter Lily was 7 years old, sitting at the table with a crayon in her hand, and Vanessa said it the way you say something you have believed for years but finally stopped hiding. "Your father is a loser, baby. He always will be." I pressed my back against that wall and did not move. I did not walk in. I did not defend myself. I stood there and let it burn into me like a brand, because I understood something in that moment with complete, terrifying clarity. The pain you survive without collapsing is the pain that eventually becomes power. I just had to survive it first. Does this story already feel real to you? Subscribe right now. Drop a comment below. Who in your life called you nothing before you became everything? My name is Ethan Cole. I was 57 years old, working a $14 an hour warehouse job in Gastonia, North Carolina. I drove a cracked windshield 2008 Civic. My brother Derek had borrowed $40,000 from me, vanished into a restaurant business with his wife Renata, and never returned a single call about repayment. My mother was fighting stage 3 kidney disease alone because I could not afford the specialist she needed. And my wife was teaching my children to be ashamed of me. They were all wrong about who I was. And I made a decision that night that I would spend every remaining year of my life making sure they watched me prove it. The divorce filing arrived on a Thursday. Vanessa's attorney was a downtown Charlotte firm, expensive, the kind with a glass lobby and a receptionist who answers before the second ring. My attorney was a public defender named Marcus who worked out of a shared office in Gastonia with the particular look of a man who had lost too many cases on behalf of people who could not afford to win them. The hearing lasted 40 minutes. I received every other weekend. 48 hours per month with my son Caden, who was 9, and my daughter Lily, who was 7. Vanessa sat at the plaintiff's table in a grey blazer, composed and deliberate. Her mother Diane sat in the gallery 3 rows back. Diane, who had called me a charity case at Christmas dinner 6 years earlier when she thought the kitchen noise was loud enough to cover her voice. She had that same expression now. The look of someone watching a confirmation rather than a verdict. After the ruling, I sat in my car in the courthouse parking garage for exactly 22 minutes. I counted every one. I was not crying. I was memorizing. I was filing away every face, every satisfied silence, every small smirk at my expense. I was not planning anything dramatic that afternoon. I was doing something far more dangerous. I was deciding that none of them would ever again have the privilege of seeing me break. Everything I felt from that point forward would be converted. When they eventually had to watch what I had built, I wanted it to arrive like a freight train they never once heard coming. My brother Derek called me 11 days after the divorce. He needed something, dressed in the language of concern the way he always dressed his needs. He opened with "How are you holding up, brother?" which was his standard entry before arriving at the actual point. It took him 6 minutes to get there. He wanted me to sign off on selling our father's land in Concord. 4 acres on the north edge of town, left equally to both of us in the will. A developer had offered $280,000 for the full parcel, $140,000 to each of us. He said I needed the money. He said it gently, which was the part that cut the deepest. He was not wrong that I needed money. I was behind on rent in Gastonia. My electricity was on a payment plan. I was eating rice and canned beans 3 nights a week. But that land was the last physical thing my father had left. Marcus Cole spent 30 years in logistics, saved every extra dollar, and bought those 4 acres with the quiet intention of building something lasting for his sons. Derek had already taken $40,000 from me. Now he wanted the inheritance too. I told him I needed time. He said time was something I could not afford in my position. I heard Renata's voice in the background before he hung up. She was the one who had calculated this. Derek was the face. She was always the engine. I drove out to that land the next morning, stood at the fence line, and made a promise to the empty field and to my father's memory that I was not selling. Then I called a property attorney in Cabarrus County and paid him $400 I could not spare to document every communication Derek had ever sent me about that property. I enrolled in the night program at Rowan Cabarrus Community College that fall. Logistics and supply chain management. I had spent enough years inside warehouses to understand the system from the ground up, and a retired shift supervisor named Ron Hadley had once told me I had a natural mind for operational structure. I called Ron on a Sunday evening and explained where I was. He was quiet for a moment before he said, "What took you so long?" He agreed to meet with me monthly and offer whatever guidance he still had. I took a second job. Friday and Saturday nights driving rideshare across the Charlotte metro area. 5 hours of sleep on the good nights. No alcohol. No television. $60 a week on groceries, tracked in a notebook I kept in the glove compartment of the Civic. Every dollar beyond rent and food went into a savings account I labeled with a single word in the banking app, rebuild. Caden called me every Wednesday during the custody arrangement. He was 9, at the age where phone calls run sideways before landing anywhere. He told me one Wednesday that his stepfather Brad had taken the family to a Panthers game in a suite. The food. The view. The players visible from up close. I said that sounded incredible and kept my voice exactly level. After the call I sat in the parking lot of my apartment complex for 15 minutes, not from sadness but from calculation. I was measuring the gap between what my children had with me and what they had without me, and I was determining with cold precision how much work remained before that gap flipped permanently in my direction. It was the only math that mattered to me. Vanessa remarried 16 months after the divorce. His name was Brad Holloway. Commercial real estate. Black Range Rover. A wristwatch that cost more than my previous annual salary. Caden told me about the wedding mid-sentence at a diner on Independence Boulevard during a custody weekend. Brad had given him an Xbox for the occasion. There had been a DJ and a photo booth in a rented space in uptown Charlotte. I asked Caden if he had fun. He said yeah. I ordered us both pie and talked about his baseball team for the next half hour. What I felt during that conversation was not despair and it was not jealousy. It was cold, focused, architectural fury. My children were constructing their memories inside a life that had reduced me to a footnote, and every birthday and Tuesday evening and school pickup I was absent from was another brick in a wall being built between the father I was and the father my children deserved to experience. I could mourn that wall, or I could build something that forced reality to reorganize entirely around what I was becoming. There was no third option worth taking. Dr. Patricia Okafor, my program director at Rowan Cabarrus, submitted my name for a logistics internship at Meridian Supply Solutions that spring. I found out on a Tuesday afternoon and told no one for 3 days. I needed it to be real before I allowed it to become a story I told myself. The internship became a contract role. The contract role became a full-time position. 8 months into that position, I identified 3 critical inefficiencies in Meridian's Eastern distribution model and submitted a restructuring proposal that saved the company an estimated $2.3 million annually. My director James Whitfield presented the plan to senior leadership and named me specifically on the opening slide. That room was the first professional space where I understood I had not been tolerated or accommodated. I belonged there. The distance between those two experiences is one that cannot be explained to anyone who has not crossed it. My salary doubled. Then it doubled again the following year when I was promoted to Regional Operations Director. I moved into a 2-bedroom unit in South Charlotte. The second bedroom I furnished with deliberate care. A bed and bookshelf for Caden. A desk and reading lamp for Lily. Their names on the doors. Every custody weekend the refrigerator was stocked. Every conversation we had was worth having. I was constructing a competing gravitational pull, something that would draw my children toward me not because the court required it but because the life I was building had actual, undeniable weight. I filed for expanded custody that spring. Vanessa's downtown firm opposed it immediately. The court reviewed my income, my housing, my children's school records and their own written statements. The new order established equal time. I picked Caden and Lily up from school on the first day of the new arrangement and sat in the school parking lot afterward with my forehead on the steering wheel. I allowed myself 90 seconds. Then I started the car. There was still considerable work left to do and I was not close to finished. Derek filed the partition action in the fall of 2023. The certified letter arrived on a Monday morning. He had found a legal mechanism, applied it cleanly, and the Concord property was moving toward court-ordered sale with or without my cooperation. His share would be $155,000. My share would sit in escrow while my objections were processed. He had been patient. He had waited until he calculated I would be too exhausted by the custody case to mount any serious defense. What Derek had not calculated was the Cabarrus County property attorney I had retained 3 years earlier. Every email Derek had ever sent me about that land was preserved in a legal file. Every voicemail applying financial pressure. Every text referencing his communications with the developer Stonepath Properties before the partition was ever filed. His attorney had not known about those communications because Derek had not disclosed them. Stonepath had allegedly promised Derek a consulting fee on top of the sale price, an arrangement constituting breach of fiduciary duty between co-owners that appeared in none of the official filings. My attorney filed suit in early 2024. Derek's representation initially dismissed the claim. 6 months later Derek settled, paying me $87,000 directly on top of the escrow distribution. No phone call accompanied the payment. His attorney's office handled everything in writing, which told me everything I needed to know about where Derek was emotionally. The settlement drained the financial reserve he and Renata had built together. She filed for divorce from him 3 months after the check cleared. She had organized her entire life around his financial judgment, and when that judgment proved both dishonest and catastrophically expensive, she left the way she had always operated. Calculating the odds and choosing the superior position. Meridian offered me an equity stake in a struggling subsidiary called Vertex Delivery Partners in early 2024. Last-mile logistics across 3 regional markets, hemorrhaging money every quarter. James Whitfield gave me 30 days to assess. My restructuring proposal outlined a path to profitability inside 2 years. They gave me 12% equity and a compensation package that placed me for the first time in a bracket I had previously only observed from a distance. I brought in 2 people. Priya Desai, a data analyst I had identified through a professional network event in Charlotte, rebuilt our routing algorithms from the foundation upward. Tony Garza, a fleet coordinator I located through a contact at a regional trucking conference, rebuilt supplier relationships that had been neglected for a decade. 19 months later Vertex posted its first profitable quarter. Per delivery costs dropped 22%. Delivery accuracy reached 97.4, highest in the region for 2 consecutive quarters. I bought a house in Concord. For bedrooms, a yard, a front porch, a 15-minute drive from the land Derek had maneuvered away from me. On the day I received the keys I stood in the empty living room and called my mother. She had been in managed kidney care for years by then, and I had been quietly covering her specialist costs for the past 2. She cried when I told her about the house. I let her finish before I spoke. I told her that no one on earth had given this to me. She told me that was the best thing she had ever heard me say. I wrote that down in the notebook I still kept in the glove compartment. Some things deserve to be written. Caden was accepted to Duke University in April 2025. Full academic scholarship. He had been an honor student since 7th grade, a published essayist in a national high school journal, and one of the top competitive debaters in the state of North Carolina. He called me first. Not his mother. Me. He said, "Dad, I got in." I was in the parking lot outside the Vertex offices. My hand was shaking when I pressed the phone to my ear. I told him I was proud of him. He said he knew. He said he had always known I would get here. He was 18 years old and said it like a simple, established fact, like it had never been in serious question. I did not speak for several seconds after that. Lily was accepted to UNC Chapel Hill the following year, studying biomedical engineering. She wanted to focus on kidney-related medical device research, connected to that path through her grandmother's illness and through a professor I had cold-called after reading his published work online. He later wrote one of her primary recommendation letters. Vanessa called the week of Lily's acceptance. We had not spoken beyond logistics in 5 years. She said she was calling to tell me I had done a good job. Her voice had something underneath it that I had not heard in a long time. Something that might have once mattered to me. I thanked her briefly and ended the call in under 2 minutes. I had not built any of this for her acknowledgement. I had not built it for Diane or for Derek or for any courtroom or any judge. Caden and Lily had succeeded at a level that permanently overwritten everything Vanessa had ever said in that kitchen. That was the only verdict I had ever required. Diane suffered a stroke in the winter of 2025. Vanessa called to inform me. I said I was sorry to hear it and ended the call. I sent nothing. Not flowers. Not a message. Not a word beyond what basic civil decency required of me in that 30-second conversation. Some people spend their lives waiting for closure from the people who wronged them. I stopped waiting for that years ago. The only closure I have ever needed is the kind you build yourself, and I had been building it for over a decade without asking anyone's permission. Derek reached out that same winter. The restaurant was gone. Renata was gone. He was managing a retail chain location in Greensboro. He asked to meet for dinner. I agreed, not out of forgiveness but because I wanted him to sit across from me and see what I had become using nothing he had given me. We met at a steakhouse off the highway. I arrived in the car I drove now and wore what I wore now and said very little for the first 30 minutes. He apologized. I told him I heard him. I did not tell him I forgave him. I told him clearly and without heat that if he wanted any version of a relationship with me going forward, he would need to demonstrate it through consistent behavior over years, not over a single dinner, and that I would not be softening that expectation to ease his discomfort. My mother passed in the spring of 2026, surrounded by the people who loved her. Caden spoke at her service without notes. He stood at that podium and delivered words that made the room go absolutely still. I watched my son speak and I felt something I have no precise language for, older than pride, heavier than relief. I looked at the rows of people who had once looked at me and seen nothing worth keeping. Every one of them was watching my son. Every one of them had to sit there and witness what my silence had produced. I did not need to say a single word. I never had to say a single word. That was always the point.